Imagine a life where you achieve more by doing less, where your actions flow effortlessly and stress becomes a distant memory. This isn't a fantasy, it's the essence of Wu Wei, the ancient Taoist principle of effortless action. In our upcoming video, Wu Wei, the art of letting things happen, we'll explore how embracing this philosophy can transform your daily life. You'll discover how to align with the natural flow of the universe, making decisions with calm clarity, enhancing your relationships by letting go of control, and finding the perfect balance between action and rest. Join us on this journey to unlock the secrets of Wu Wei and learn how to live in harmony with the world around you. Don't miss out. Subscribe now and be ready to transform your life through the power of effortless action. What is Wu Wei? The art of flowing with life. Wu Wei is one of the most profound yet misunderstood concepts in Taoism. At its core, it means effortless action, going with the flow of life rather than forcing things to happen. But does this mean doing nothing? Not at all. Wu Wei is about acting in harmony with the natural rhythms of the universe, like a river effortlessly carving its way through the landscape. It is the art of non-resistance, the ability to move through life with ease and grace rather than struggle and tension. The term Wu Wei is often translated as non-action, but this can be misleading. A more accurate understanding is action without force or spontaneous alignment. Imagine an athlete in the zone, a musician lost in their music, or a surfer perfectly riding a wave. They aren't passively waiting, they are engaged yet without struggle. That's Wu Wei in action. It is the difference between forcing and allowing, between exhausting effort and effortless effectiveness. This idea comes from the Tao Te Ching, written by Lao Tzu over 2,500 years ago. He describes Wu Wei as the way of the sage, someone who moves with the flow of life rather than against it. It's not laziness or passivity, it's intelligent, adaptive action. The ancient Chinese believed that rulers who governed with Wu Wei allowed their people to thrive because they did not interfere unnecessarily. Instead of imposing rigid control, they created the right conditions for natural harmony to emerge. Nature itself is the perfect example of Wu Wei. Trees grow, rivers flow, and seasons change without force or resistance. Birds do not struggle to fly. They simply open their wings and glide with the wind. Fish do not fight the water. They move effortlessly with the currents. Everything in nature operates in alignment with its true nature. It doesn't resist or overthink. It simply is. But how does this apply to human life? We often believe that success and happiness come from constant effort, struggle, and control. We push ourselves to the limit, micromanage situations, and stress over outcomes. Yet paradoxically, the more we force things, the harder life becomes. When you push too hard in a conversation, trying to convince someone, they resist more. When you overthink a problem, clarity becomes harder to find. When you desperately chase success, it seems to run further away. Wu Wei suggests a different approach. Step back, let go of resistance, and allow solutions to emerge naturally. It's about trusting the process instead of forcing results. This doesn't mean inaction, it means knowing when to act and when to wait. The best decisions often come when we are calm and receptive, rather than desperate and controlling. A key practice of Wu Wei is detachment from rigid expectations. Instead of clinging to a specific outcome, you remain open and responsive to the unfolding moment. Life is unpredictable, and the more we try to control every detail, the more we set ourselves up for frustration. But when we learn to adapt, to flow with change rather than resist it, we begin to experience a deep sense of ease. Consider water. It is one of the most powerful forces on Earth, yet it never fights or resists. It moves around obstacles effortlessly, shaping even the hardest rocks over time. It takes the form of whatever contains it, yet it is never confined. Lao Tzu famously said, "Nothing in the world is as soft and yielding as water. Yet for dissolving the hard and inflexible, nothing can surpass it." This is the essence of Wu Wei, softness that overcomes hardness, flexibility that triumphs over rigidity. Wu Wei also applies to personal growth. Many people approach self-improvement with force, trying to eliminate bad habits or force themselves into new routines. But lasting transformation happens naturally when we create the right conditions. A tree does not struggle to grow, it simply absorbs sunlight, water and nutrients, and growth happens by itself. Likewise, when we align our lives with what nourishes us, whether it's healthy relationships, meaningful work, or self-care, growth becomes effortless. This principle can also be seen in creativity. The best ideas often come when we are relaxed, not when we are desperately trying to think of something. Writers, artists, and innovators frequently describe moments of inspiration as a flow state, a state of effortless action where everything seems to click into place. This is Wu Wei at work. The more you trust the process, the more creativity unfolds naturally. Wu Wei teaches that life isn't a battle to be won, but a river to be navigated. The more you fight the current, the more you exhaust yourself. But when you align with the flow, everything starts to feel effortless. This is the beginning of mastering the art of letting things happen, the wisdom of nature, lessons from Wu Wei in the natural world. If you want to understand Wu Wei, look at nature. The universe operates with perfect harmony, without force or resistance. The sun rises and sets effortlessly. Seasons change without struggle. Rivers flow without needing to be pushed. This is the wisdom of Wu Wei, the ability to move with life instead of against it. One of the best teachers of Wu Wei is water. Lao Tzu often used water as a metaphor for the Tao because it embodies effortless action. Water adapts to its environment without losing its essence. It moves around obstacles instead of fighting them. It can be gentle like a quiet stream or powerful like an unstoppable waterfall. Yet no matter what form it takes, it remains water. Imagine a river encountering a rock. It doesn't stop or push against it. It flows around it, slowly shaping the rock over time. That is how Wu Wei works in life. Instead of wasting energy resisting problems, we learn to move through them with ease. Many of our struggles come from resisting what is, wishing things were different, forcing outcomes, or refusing to accept change. But when we embrace the path of least resistance, we find that life moves forward naturally. Another lesson from nature is timing. Trees do not force themselves to grow. They grow when the conditions are right. Birds do not try to fly before their wings are ready. Everything in nature happens at the perfect moment. Wu Wei teaches us to trust our own natural timing. Sometimes we feel pressured to act when the best thing we can do is wait. Other times we hesitate when action is needed. When we learn to listen, to feel when it's time to act, and when it's time to be still, we begin to align with the flow of life. Animals also live by Wu Wei. A cat does not plan each movement, it simply responds to the moment. A tiger does not waste energy chasing prey when it is not hungry. Every movement is precise, effortless, and perfectly timed. Humans, on the other hand, often overthink and force situations instead of trusting their instincts. Wu Wei reminds us to reconnect with our natural intelligence, to trust our intuition rather than second-guessing every decision. Even chaos and unpredictability in nature follow the principle of Wu Wei. Storms come and go, forests burn and regrow, ecosystems balance themselves without interference. When we stop trying to control every detail of life and instead trust in the natural unfolding of events, we begin to experience peace. This doesn't mean we should never act. Wu Wei is about intelligent action, acting in harmony with the moment, rather than out of fear or resistance. When a bird builds a nest, it doesn't stress about every twig. It simply does what needs to be done. When an animal faces danger, it runs or fights without overthinking. Likewise, when we learn to act with clarity and ease rather than anxiety and force, our actions become more effective. So how can we apply this wisdom in everyday life? Observe nature. Spend time watching how effortlessly everything works. Notice how plants grow, how water moves, how animals act without hesitation. Let go of unnecessary control. Not everything needs to be forced. Sometimes the best thing you can do is trust that life is unfolding as it should. Adapt like water. When you face obstacles, instead of resisting, ask yourself, how can I move around this? How can I flow with this situation instead of fighting it? Trust your instincts. Overthinking often leads to inaction or poor decisions. Learn to trust your gut feelings and respond naturally to life's challenges. Know when to act and when to wait. Some moments require effort, while others require patience. Wisdom comes from knowing the difference. The universe has been operating in harmony for billions of years. The same natural intelligence that moves the stars and the tides also moves within us. When we embrace Wu Wei, we align with this flow, and life begins to unfold with ease. If this lesson on Wu Wei and the wisdom of nature has brought you value, consider subscribing. Our goal is to bring you insights that help you navigate life effortlessly, just like nature does. And if you have thoughts or experiences with Wu Wei, share them in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. Wu Wei and decision-making. Acting from calm. Every day we make countless decisions, some small, like what to eat for breakfast, and others life-changing, like choosing a career or ending a relationship. Many of us struggle with decision-making, overthinking every possibility, fearing the wrong choice or forcing an outcome. But what if the best decisions don't come from effort, but from ease? Wu Wei offers a radically different approach to decision-making. Instead of pushing, we listen. Instead of forcing, we allow. Instead of acting from stress, we act from calm. This doesn't mean we become passive or avoid responsibility. It means we make choices in alignment with the natural flow of life. Have you ever had a moment where an answer came effortlessly? Maybe after a long walk during a quiet moment, or when you weren't even thinking about the problem. That's Wu Wei in action. Clarity often arises when the mind is still. The more we struggle to figure things out, the more confused we become. But when we relax, the right path often reveals itself. The problem with forcing decisions. Many people make decisions out of fear, pressure, or impatience. When we feel we must decide immediately, we often choose based on anxiety rather than wisdom. We might take a job we don't want because we fear missing an opportunity. We might stay in a toxic relationship because we dread change. We might rush into an investment because we feel pressured by time. But decisions made from stress rarely lead to good outcomes. They come from a place of resistance, from forcing life instead of flowing with it. Wu Wei teaches that the best choices arise naturally, without struggle. When we stop pushing, we often find that the right path was always there. We just needed the calmness to see it. How to apply Wu Wei to decision-making. Pause before acting. When faced with a decision, instead of rushing, take a step back. Give yourself space. Sometimes, the simple act of pausing allows the answer to become clear. Observe. Without judgment. Imagine your mind as a still lake. When the water is calm, it reflects reality clearly. But if you stir the water with overthinking, everything becomes distorted. Try to see your options clearly, without emotional turbulence. Feel the decision, don't just think it. Logic is important, but some of the best decisions come from intuition. How does each choice feel? If something feels forced, stressful, or exhausting, it may not be the right path. If it feels light, natural, and easy, that's often a sign of alignment. Trust timing. Not all decisions need to be made immediately. Sometimes waiting allows the situation to evolve naturally, revealing the best choice. Just like nature doesn't rush, trees don't force themselves to grow faster. Our best decisions often come at the right moment, not the rushed one. Let go of the illusion of control. Many of us want to control every outcome, believing that if we analyze enough, we can guarantee success. But life is unpredictable. Wu Wei reminds us that some things are beyond our control. The paradox is that when we accept this, we make better decisions because we are no longer clouded by fear, the power of the effortless choice. A powerful example of Wu Wei in decision-making is found in martial arts. Skilled fighters do not react with tension or hesitation. They respond naturally, effortlessly, without overthinking. They trust their training, their instincts, and the moment. The same applies to life. The best business leaders, athletes, and artists often describe a sense of flow, a state where they make decisions without second-guessing, without resistance. They are not overthinking, they are simply doing. You've probably experienced this in your own life. Think of a time when you made a decision effortlessly, without stress, and everything just worked out. That's the essence of Wu Wei, moving with life instead of against it. Wu Wei doesn't mean avoiding decisions. It means making them from a place of clarity, calm, and natural alignment. The next time you face a choice, instead of forcing an answer, try stepping back. Let the right path come to you. If this perspective on Wu Wei and decision-making resonated with you, consider subscribing. We're here to explore ideas that make life smoother, simpler, and more meaningful. And if you've ever made a great decision by letting go and flowing with life, share your experience in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Wu Wei in relationships, letting go of control to better connect relationships, often feel like a balancing act between connection and independence. Many people think that maintaining strong relationships requires constant effort, control, or proving one's worth. But Wu Wei suggests the opposite. The strongest relationships flow naturally, without force or resistance. When we try to control people, they pull away. When we push too hard for love, friendship, or approval, we create tension. But when we let go of the need to manage every detail, something shifts. Relationships become lighter, more peaceful, and more authentic. Imagine a river flowing effortlessly toward the ocean. It doesn't need to force its path. It moves around obstacles, adapts, and continues its journey. The same principle applies to human connections. When we stop demanding that others behave a certain way, when we stop seeking constant validation, and when we accept people as they are, we allow relationships to unfold naturally. Clinging to someone too tightly often makes them feel suffocated, while allowing space lets the bond grow stronger on its own. Many relationships struggle because people approach them with an agenda, trying to change a partner, expecting a friend to act a certain way, or assuming that love means control. But when a relationship is built on control, it becomes exhausting. Wu Wei teaches that true connection happens when we let things be. Instead of pushing conversations in a certain direction, we can listen. Instead of demanding a specific response, we can accept what is given. Instead of chasing affection, we can trust that the right people will stay. Think about the friendships and relationships that feel effortless, where conversations flow, where silence is comfortable, and where there is no pressure to be anything other than yourself. These are the moments when Wu Wei is at work. There is no need to impress, fix, or force. There is only presence. The best relationships don't require constant effort to sustain them. They exist naturally because both people feel at ease. Love, too, follows the same pattern. Many chase love as if it's something to be captured, thinking that if they try hard enough, they can make someone love them. But love, like water, cannot be held by force. It moves freely, finds its own path, and flows where it is welcomed. When we stop chasing and start trusting, we create space for true connection. This doesn't mean we become passive in relationships or stop showing care. Wu Wei is not about indifference, it's about acting without unnecessary force. We give love without expecting a return. We express ourselves honestly without trying to manipulate an outcome. We trust that if a relationship is meant to continue, it will, and if it isn't, letting go will open space for something better. Letting go of control in relationships is one of the most freeing things we can do. It removes pressure, reduces anxiety, and allows us to enjoy connection for what it is rather than what we want it to be. Wu Wei teaches that life flows more smoothly when we stop resisting its natural course, and in relationships, the less we force, the deeper the connection becomes. If this message brought you value, subscribe. Here we continue exploring ideas that make life simpler, more fluid, and more fulfilling. And if you've ever felt a relationship improve when you let go of control, share your experience in the comments. We'd love to hear your story. The power of rest, Wu Wei, and the balance between action and inaction. In a world that glorifies hustle, rest is often seen as a weakness. Productivity is praised, while slowing down feels like falling behind. But what if true power lies not in constant action, but in knowing when to stop? Wu Wei teaches that there is a natural rhythm to everything. Just as day turns to night, as the tides rise and fall, as the seasons shift effortlessly from one to the next, life moves in cycles, action and rest, effort and ease, movement and stillness. Yet many people resist rest. They feel guilty for taking breaks. They equate stillness with laziness. But nature doesn't rush, and everything still gets done. A tree doesn't force itself to grow faster. A river doesn't struggle to reach the ocean. There is wisdom in knowing when to act and when to wait. Think about the most effective moments in life. A great conversation includes silence. A skilled musician understands that pauses between notes create the rhythm. A fighter knows that waiting for the right moment to strike is more powerful than throwing endless punches. The same applies to life. Constant action without rest leads to exhaustion. But when we learn to pause, to step back, to allow things to unfold instead of always pushing forward, we begin to see the effortless flow of Wu Wei. Rest is not wasted time. It's the space where clarity emerges. How often have you struggled with a problem only to find the answer appear when you stop thinking about it? How often have your best ideas come not from force, but from stillness? When we embrace rest, we give ourselves the chance to recharge. The mind clears, the body heals, energy returns. Then, when it's time to act, we do so from a place of strength rather than exhaustion. Wu Wei doesn't mean never taking action. It means taking action at the right time. A farmer doesn't plant seeds in winter. A hunter doesn't chase prey when the conditions aren't right. They wait. They rest. And when the moment comes, they move with precision. So ask yourself, are you pushing when you should be pausing? Are you forcing action when stillness would serve you better? The more we align with the natural cycles of effort and rest, the more effortlessly life unfolds. If this idea speaks to you, subscribe. Here we explore the wisdom of flowing with life instead of fighting against it. And if you've ever experienced the power of rest, how stepping back led to a breakthrough, share your story in the comments. Your insight might help someone else find their own balance. Living Wu Wei. integrating flow into your daily life. Wu Wei is not just an idea, it's a way of being, a way of moving through the world with ease instead of struggle, with presence instead of resistance. But how do we bring this into daily life? How do we shift from forcing to flowing? It starts with awareness, noticing when we are pushing too hard, recognizing when tension is creeping in, feeling when we are trying to control something that doesn't need to be controlled. Wu Wei is about aligning with what is instead of fighting against it. In conversation, it means listening rather than planning what to say next. In work, it means focusing on what matters rather than forcing productivity. In decision-making, it means trusting the process instead of obsessing over every outcome. Small shifts make a difference. Walking without rushing, eating without distraction, breathing fully instead of holding tension, letting go of the need to have all the answers right away, trusting that clarity will come when the time is right. Wu Wei doesn't mean doing nothing. It means doing the right thing at the right time with the right energy. It means acting from a place of calm rather than stress. It means embracing life's natural flow instead of constantly swimming upstream. Some days that might mean taking bold action. Other days it might mean stepping back and allowing things to unfold. The wisdom is in knowing the difference. The more we practice, the more effortless life becomes. Problems feel lighter. Creativity flows more freely. Relationships become less strained. We begin to trust life rather than trying to control it. As you go through today, take notice. Where can you let things go? Where can you allow instead of resist? Where can you move with life rather than against it? The more we practice Wu Wei, the more we see that life has always been flowing. We just needed to stop pushing so much. If this message speaks to you, consider subscribing. Here, we explore the path of least resistance, the art of effortless action. And if you've ever had moments when life just flowed, where everything aligned without struggle, share your experience in the comments. Your insight could inspire someone else to trust the flow. An invitation to practice Wu Wei. Wu Wei is more than just an idea. It's something to be experienced. A way of moving through life with ease, trust, and deep awareness. But simply understanding Wu Wei isn't enough. It must be lived. For most, the default way of life is resistance. We push against time, rushing from one task to another. We resist change, trying to hold on to things that are meant to grow and shift. We struggle with uncertainty, overthinking choices, and fearing the unknown. In relationships, we try to control outcomes, forgetting that true connection flows naturally. It can't be forced. But what happens when we release control? Not giving up, but letting go. Letting go of unnecessary tension. Letting go of the urge to force every situation. Letting go of the belief that struggle is needed for success. Wu Wei reminds us that life is already moving. The seasons change on their own. Rivers carve through mountains without resistance. A tree doesn't try to grow, it simply grows. And when we align with this natural rhythm, everything shifts. Decisions become clearer because we stop overthinking and start trusting. Relationships feel lighter because we stop controlling and start allowing. Work becomes more fulfilling because we stop forcing productivity and start acting with inspiration. Even rest begins to feel different, not as something we earn after exhaustion, but as a natural part of life's rhythm. So how do you practice Wu Wei? It starts with small moments, noticing when you're forcing something that doesn't need to be forced, catching yourself when you're overthinking a decision that would be clearer if you simply paused, learning to trust that the right words, the right actions, and the right timing will come, without stress, without resistance, just awareness. Observe nature. Watch how water flows with ease. See how birds glide effortlessly. Feel the wind move freely through the world. Nature is always teaching Wu Wei, if we are open to listening, and most importantly, practicing. Wu Wei is not about passivity, it's about harmony. Acting when the moment is right, resting when it's needed, responding to life as it unfolds rather than resisting it. Learning to notice the moments when less effort leads to better outcomes. If this journey resonates with you, consider subscribing. Here, we explore the path of least resistance, the wisdom of effortless action, the art of flowing with life instead of struggling against it. And if Wu Wei has ever made a difference in your life, share your experience in the comments. A moment when things fell into place once you stopped forcing. A time when clarity arrived the moment you let go. A lesson from nature that shifted your outlook. Your story might encourage someone else to trust the flow. Wu Wei is always at work around you. The question is, are you ready to embrace it?